very much to everyone for joining. We're going to have a great session today that's going to be led by Titus Ajayi. Titus is a SEMA qualified finance leader with an MBA. He spent 15 years working for various businesses, currently with William Turner Son Ltd, which is part of Banner Limited. And throughout his career, one of his passions has been developing and mentoring more junior finance team members. So he's going to talk today about developing high-performing finance teams. We really want it to be interactive. So if you've got anything that you want to, volunteer, you want to discuss, just pop your hands up, wave, and then Titus will be able to kind of just see that. And then, we want people sort of engaging and chatting. So yeah, with that, I'm going to pass over to you, Titus. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christine, for the intro. Hope you can all hear me okay. Yeah?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me today. It's my first one of these, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, good to see a decent number as well. Thank you all very much for joining. Before I start, I would just like to share my screen. I've created some slides just to act more as a prompt, just to help me kind of get through and go through the points. And I believe in a useful order. So I hope you can all see that. This is my screen. It's a nice purple presentation, which is what I've gone with my color scheme. I do like purple. I've actually got a purple jumper as well with me. You can see that. So yeah, I thought that's why that's called to pick. So developing a high-performing finance team. Obviously, finance in every business that I've worked for, my experience with finance has been that finance has been kind of been a very, very highly respected, highly valued department, but not always the department that gets a lot of praise. What I mean by that is, my experience, I've observed that people often tend to have the highest expectations from a finance team. Like it's a shock when something goes wrong in a finance team. When is an whether it's an error or transposition made, whether a number is wrong in the presentation, whether someone's been paid £10 more or the £10 less. When it comes to finance, people have the highest expectations of us. And when compare finance to other departments like operations, whether that's sales, maybe more kind of front end part of the business, whether that is the marketing, sometimes mistakes can be forgiven a little easier. So I saw that to mean that having a quality, a high performing finance team where essentially you don't tend to hear from them or hear about them. Usually when you have that kind of scenario, that means the team is performing well. When there's no drama around finance, when there's no kind of question marks being asked around finance, things often ticking along very, very well. I'm sure most of us being senior people on this call, we're to resonate with that. But by all means, as we go through the presentation, feel free to to speak up or to raise your hands and either contribute your thoughts or indeed ask any questions. So I'll now go through what I believe are some of the key steps to take or the key things to do to develop a high performing finance team. I've got 6 bullet points and I'll just expand a little bit more on them as I go along. But as Kristen mentioned, feel free to ask questions at any point. Okay, so first one, setting clear and defined expectations. So obviously this is critical, whether it's a beginning of a role, coming into a role as a at a finance or finance director. It's very important, or whether you have someone new coming into the team as well. It's very important that from the get-go, everyone understands what's expected of them. That the deadlines are clear and they're established. That there's a performance standards, and everyone knows what their role is, how they fit in into the finance team. This is really quite clear in terms of giving people a sense of clarity, a sense of ownership, and that they know, they know themselves without anyone telling them whether they're falling short of those standards or not. So, I've got in here, clear deadlines, standards, well-defined
You
roles.
need to move your presentation on. We're still on the first page.
Oh, okay.
I just thought we're referencing and we can't see.
All right. I'm sharing my screen, but maybe it's not moving along as
Oh,
I.
that's it. That's good now.
Oh, okay, okay. Right. I think I know what's going on. I started a slideshow, but maybe that didn't go along. Right. Okay. Um, ensuring every team member understands their responsibilities and how their work contributes to the overall objectives. So everyone knowing how they fit into the jigsaw, jigsaw puzzle. This clarity helps prevent misunderstandings and aligns the team efforts with organization goals. So I'll speak further later on around ownership and finance being partners to the business. But I think within the finance team as an immediate start point, when there's absolute clarity among everyone around what responsibilities are, things like that, it helps them to really feel at ease. I would say have a clear sense of what's required from them, particularly for individuals who are ambitious. Now, obviously, it's not in scenarios where there needs to be some overlap or supporting someone who's maybe lagging behind, or filling in for someone. Obviously, there is space for that dynamism as well. But yeah, first point: setting clear and defined expectations. Second point. Can you guys still see that? Is it following through? Okay, so second point, provide regular feedback. So standards are set, but then, as mentioned, the team members would more often than not know if they're falling short of the standards. However, it's important as the finance leader to provide regular feedback to the finance team so everyone knows how they're getting on. So maintaining continuous communication through regular feedback sessions. With every relationship, whether it's spousal, and obviously in this scenario, talking about working relationships, a constant and consistent line of communication is actually critical. To avoid misunderstandings, to air grievances maybe or air concerns, things like that. So a good communication channel is critical to be established. This way team members are kept informed about the performances, written to their targets, whether it's key KPIs around deliverables or month end or reporting, monthly, weekly reporting. Having that consistent feedback helps them to stay on top of things. Because if in a case where they don't know they're falling below the standard, having that regular feedback, it gives them the opportunity to turn things around quickly if they have the ability and obviously have the vigor and the drive to turn that around. And the feedback has to be constructive as well. So this helps them to stay motivated. I tend to do this in form of one-to-ones, regular one-to-ones. So the way I've done things over the last few years of being in management roles was once a week and have a wider team catch up, just see where everyone's up to, any concerns they have, give them a chance to speak up or raise any concerns, and then addition to that, perhaps maybe more importantly, having regular one-to-ones with my individual team members. This just gives my direct reports the opportunity to speak in confidence if they need to. Gives me the opportunity to give them feedback as well on how they're performing, if they've done something that perhaps I'm not happy with, or the falling short of a particular goal or standards that I've set. Gives the opportunity to have that conversation in private and to really have really good open communication and to be productive, basically. So regular feedback. Third point, creating an awareness of the team's impact on the business. As mentioned before, finance are often highly trusted, highly valued, though sometimes people don't often verbally communicate how much they value the finance team. Because particularly in businesses that are sales driven, you find that the sales teams are the rock stars of the business. They get all the nights out and all that fun stuff. But actually, finance, as I mentioned, when things go wrong with finance, there's much more of an alarm and a surprise and concern than any other department, in my experience, that is. So giving the finance team members the awareness that they know not just how to fit into the department, but into the wider organization, and give them a sense of, give them the knowledge of if I, as an individual, whether it's management accountant, finance manager, whatever it is, fail to meet my deadlines or fail to fulfill my role efficiently, it has this impacts on business. So, for example, a management accountant, just using a very common deadline, delivering the month end or in management accounts, month end reporting. If the management accountant or the person delivering the accounts doesn't deliver it in good time scale, it means that the management team don't have the information quickly enough to, if there's a performance issue within the business that perhaps the management team isn't aware of, the longer the month end turnaround takes, then obviously, the more time that's kind of spent not addressing issues that are flagged up in the management accounts. So as I was mentioning here, finance are the gatekeepers of the business, right? Not just financially, that is the main one, but also in terms of sometimes compliance, sometimes even sometimes operational standards. Finance has a critical role in the business. So having awareness of the impact enhances motivation and fosters a sense of ownership, driving individuals to become key contributors and take initiative. When there's a sense of awareness, it really drives, someone like myself. I go back to when I was much more junior, when I knew what impact my role in having the business, that pushed me to make sure that, I always delivered, essentially my end of the bargain. So I believe this is critical. So I've gone through half the points now. Just any questions so far, or any thoughts, any agreements, disagreements, perhaps? If I go on to point 4.
I was just going to say, I mean, it all sounds like kind of common sense stuff, but
Yes. Yeah.
actually, it's completely surprising though how many organizations forget this. And you have all the best intentions of doing the one-to-ones, and then you miss a week,
Yeah.
and then you get back into it. And
Exactly.
actually,
Spirals.
yeah, exactly. And you mentioned about the one-to-ones. I also think it's a sign to your team that you actually care about how they're doing and what they're doing. And it's that one-on-one time, just you and your manager, to sort of feel valued, really. So I think even if it was just 15 minutes, it's a sign that, you know what, I've got 15 minutes for you and this is all about you right now. So I think that's really important. Just
Yeah.
my 2 cents.
Brilliant. Thanks, Christine. Thank you.
I have a question. My video's off.
Yes.
Sorry, scoffing my sandwich down as I mentioned to Christine. One-to-ones. I'm
Yeah.
interested and curious to know what tools people are using to maintain, manage, continue with, and what formats people are using. Maybe now's not the time, but just want to put this question out there so people can feed back when they have time.
Yeah. Good question. I mean, I'm happy to answer that pretty quickly for myself. So myself, I tend to try and keep it quite simple. Essentially, I just keep it to my notepad. So as we have in the chat, I make notes on my private notepad, make sure everything's confidential, which has a nice little padlock, and is locked away in my drawer or taken home with me every day. Any concerns that's been raised or anything that we need to address or just action points. And then, And then when I have a next one-to-one, it's about reviewing. Essentially, it's like a board meeting, like reviewing the notes that made in the previous meeting. How do we get on with this? Or are you how are you feeling about this issue you raised last time? And then it just kind of helps me kind of keep track of some of the issues or some other action points that I've had with that particular member of staff. But obviously, ideally, really, to be fair, if I'm having weekly one-to-ones with my team, between 1 week to the next, the idea is because of open communication channel, all of those things are resolved anyway or addressed through that week. So that's how I do mine. But I don't know if anyone else has any other methods that they use.
I'm just going to add another question here then. So this is how you're managing the one-to-one process from your manager point. How are your teams then taking these notes down? How are they tracking their priorities, to-do lists?
Good question. So I make sure that each member of my team, thankfully currently I have a team of 3, make sure that they on a daily basis have a list of their actions, tracking their actions, and that they are updating. So some minute point in here. Transition. Sorry. Yeah. So make sure that they are updating the their actions and So essentially, if I've agreed an action with a member of the team, that they update me if there's been a progress on that before I chase them up. So essentially, currently as well, my team, they have kind of a diary style notepad that they use on a daily basis. Here are my actions for today. If an action has been completed on the day it was meant to be completed, it's then carried over to the next day, for example. And then that means that because I've got a record of those actions as well, I can then chase them up the next meeting, and then there's an expectation then that I get an update on that particular action, that particular point. Does that make sense?
Are these one-on-ones that you're talking about formal one-on-ones? Because a finance department is on a monthly cycle.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that doing it once a week seems far too frequently. I mean, obviously you need to speak to people all the time, but I would never do a formal one-on-one every week. I've never had time in a department. I've always been short-staffed.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So certainly the meeting with a finance-wide team is on a weekly basis. The one-to-ones, they actually, I mean, depending on across the fuels I've had in recent years, I've actually varied them, as of when needed. And actually, if there's a particular point in time when a particular employee needs a bit more attention, or whether it's a performance issue, whether it's a work issue or anything like that, I can then make it more frequently. But yes, my goal is always to kind of make it on a monthly basis. However, there has absolutely been times where, because of a performance issue, I've had to make sure a particular employee, I'm having catch-ups, on a weekly basis. And then the goal then is, as things improve, they kind of spread that a little bit further to maybe past a fortnight, and then go back to the monthly cycle. So yes, I fully agree with you. The time is not there to do have a team of 4 people and have catch with them every single week. That's not on an individual level. But there have been times where I've had to do that.
Yeah, kind of the point you made earlier is very relevant. Finance only gets remembered for its mistakes, generally in the corporation. You can pay 1,000 creditors on time, and you pay one guy late, and then the whole explosion in the corporation, they think the whole of finance is a mess. So because finance is always subject to criticism, and you never get thanked for paying salaries on time every single month. it's important to motivate your team internally and give them positive feedback. And in fact, share the positive feedback. So if one guy does something good, that's the time you don't necessarily want to be confidential. And you need everyone in the team to know that this guy did something really special, and kind of make everyone strive to also get that recognition.
Absolutely.
But you've got to recognize your own team, because you're not going to get recognized by the outsiders.
No. Yeah, you're right. And oftentimes as well, actually, in my experience, I think I alluded to as well, if something happens, something negative, happens, and and there are, let's say, 2 or 3 touch points in the business. Let's say, this issue, this particular task has a touch point of operations, and then finance, and then plus the legal team, for example, and that process, whatever it is, goes wrong, finance more often than not will be the ones to get a larger share of the blame, because my experience is this expectation that finance, we have to absolutely be able to trust everything we do is top notch all the time. So sometimes it's not even the case of, there's a finance task. If the task that happens to involve finance, by a third, for example, finance will still get more of the responsibility or the blame for that.
I have a question actually for the group. So if someone in finance does something really well, would you share it just amongst the finance team, or would you share it amongst the wider business?
Well, from my side, I certainly would use every opportunity. Where we used to have, in my previous permanent position, we had monthly town halls, and I always gave one of the presentations at the town halls, and if any of my guys could be mentioned for doing something special, I would certainly mention it, because you've got to take every opportunity you can to publish good performance.
Yeah.
I would flag this to the CFO, the group CFO, and then they go feedback and congratulate the person concerned. So there is really a 3-way system here, and they feel appreciated and understand that when they do well, people above me are also learning about this. And then when there's wider management or SMT meetings, we'll talk about this. We also have a quarterly employee program. We can push forward names and why. So that's another platform for the recognition company-wide.
Yeah.
What I often try and do is, if let's say the CEO asks me for something and I get my finance team to do it, when I reply to him, I would say, Joe has managed to do this and put this together. So in my email to other people in the organization, where I can, there's no point in taking any credit yourself. You're already CFO, so why do you need credit? So whenever you can deflect that credit to someone in your team, I always try and bring a name into the email. But where it's a positive thing. If it's a negative thing, I wouldn't. But if it's a positive thing, or I can say someone else did this, it just gets their names out there and gives them credit, because it is a matter of constantly trying to motivate the team, who is typically subject to a lot of criticism.
Indeed.
I think the celebration of people, it's really important at those big events, the monthlies. But I also think whether you use Microsoft Teams or Slack, that's an amazing channel for really immediate, quick feedback, and sort of put so that it's visible to the rest of the business too. And I guess, and I'm sure where it's similar for lots of people, but working as a board, to ensure that you call out where needed people from other teams and encourage the rest of the board to do the same, so that it's the sales director, it's the tech director also celebrating the team, and sort of and vice versa. I think that we find that really motivating.
Yeah, and I know and the other things that I try to do is I think Tony kind of alluded to it as well is if it's something if of my team has done something good, I make sure I highlight that. But if an error has happened within my team by the finance team, I tend to shield my team at least publicly or rather in front of the CEO or front of business to make sure that I say, yeah, my team is messed up. Don't worry about who's done it. I take the blame. As the finance director of the business. I think what that does as well is so, and obviously, if you can feel free to, not chastise, but essentially have a meeting with that person to address that error, whatever it is. But I believe what that does is when my experience anyway, or my team feel protected in face of something negative, as opposed to having their name, in red lines in front of the CEO. When I feel protected, it actually motivates them more, and but more often than not, they think to themselves, "Yeah, that's never happened again," and then they strive for an even higher standard. That's what I've experienced as well. But Peter put a question or comment in the chat before. Let's read it out quickly and I'll just respond very quickly. It seems to me that your presentation is very simple team management. Yeah, that was kind of the goal. In my experience, finance does this stuff, whilst the rest of the business doesn't. As you allude to, this creates conflict, which manifests itself as blaming finance as a defensive back covering exercise. What do I think? Yeah, I think you're right. Unfortunately, so the things that I'm, the points that I'm going through at the moment, what I'll say is firstly, they seem obvious and simple to us, but very often, what seems obvious to finance, oftentimes to wider business, just does not happen, and because there's less of an expectation perhaps on other side or other parts of the business. I believe it's not in a company culture where there's kind of blaming, as blaming culture. That firstly is a little toxic, but in that sort of scenario, my approach, would be or has been to ensure that one, I make sure that whatever is coming out of my team is excellent, and whatever output my team has is always correct, and right, and the standards are very, very high. So one, they kind of blame my team, or as relative as possible, we get the blame. But then also build a kind of a business partnering culture with other parts of the business as well, because I find is that when that happens, those other those kind of other heads of department kind of feel a sense of ownership in terms of what finance, in terms of the output from finance, and also that generally builds a better working relationship as well when finance acts much more as a business partner to them. So hope that sort of makes some sense, but I suppose we can go into a little more detail. Great, thanks, Tana. I'll catch you later. So I'll continue then with the second half of the presentation. So point 4, adopt a goal-focused approach. And this kind of ties along with the giving ownership approach. So kind of shift from a task-oriented mindset to a goal-focused one. So as leader, concentrate on achieving business outcomes rather than merely completing tasks. This approach prioritizes delivering value to the business and fosters a results-driven culture. This approach, linked to an ownership mindset, becomes very powerful. And essentially, what I'm trying to say there is, set I suppose, as a fairly high level, or as high level as possible, kind of approach of here's what we're trying to achieve, as a business, in terms of, more medium term kind of targets, whether it's, right, we need to reduce a month-end reporting turnaround time from currently 12 working days, let's get down to 5 or 7 working days, and then kind of push that responsibility and ownership to the team members, particularly the ones who are, who are confident, ambitious, the ones who, perhaps, more senior, perhaps delegate down to the finance manager and to, further down to management accountants, to kind of then take ownership of that goal and use their own, proactive initiative to achieve it. Essentially, try and move away from a prescriptive, here's how we do things, day one, the task you do, day two, here's the task you do. Though in the example of a month-end timetable, a month-end timetable is required in terms of, deliverables day by day. That actually the way that's, delivered, I believe it's important to give that ownership, delegate that responsibility to the team to say, right, I care a lot less about how we get there. It's that we get there. Point 5, empower the team to be dynamic and forward-thinking. I think this kind of falls on from my previous point. So essentially, encourage the team to challenge the status quo. Particularly, in an SME, you can often find a mentality of, here's how I've always done things this way. I'm not quite sure what this task is doing or why we do it, but we've always done it for the last 15 years. Let's just carry on doing it. So it's important that the team feel empowered to challenge yourself and just, the status quo. Promote a culture, yeah, I think I said, where this is just, we've always done it, is not acceptable. That's not really a good response. And also, lastly, embrace a Kaizen, a continuous improvement approach, mindset to driving ongoing evolution and adaptability within a team. It's important that the team is, dynamic and they don't kind of feel siloed. Though it's important to have, as the first point said, clarity around what your role is, how you fit in. It's equally important to be dynamic and think of ways of doing things, whether it's been more efficient with processes, with tasks, whether it's been whether it's questioning, why certain things have to be done a certain way, or whether it's, whether it's a particularly IT savvy member of the team introducing a new reporting tool or an analysis tool. So I believe it's important to encourage that mindset. And for example, a few years ago, my first time using Power BI, I used Power BI, or Power BI was introduced into my team through a more junior member of my team. Kind of said, well, I've got this great analysis tool, Power BI. I think it was looking 4 years ago. At that point, I hadn't really heard of it, but kind of showed me the what we'd done with it, and yeah, it was quite good and very powerful tool, and it was quite quick as well to use. And that was probably the first time in my career where I kind of felt, oh gosh, I'm a little old now, because you kind of have people working for you bringing up, bring in more, forward thinking ideas and bringing new IT tools. Final point before I wrap up: hold the team members accountable for executing a strategy. So even the best strategies are ineffective without proper execution. Empowerment is something that is big for myself, so it's critical to empower team members to take responsibility for implementing the strategy and be willing to make changes. Again, alongside the ownership approach. A dynamic approach ensures that individuals are motivated and the team adapts to evolving needs. So again, I think similar to the previous point, really, there's a goal. Here's a goal we're trying to get to. Ownership, how we get there, what tools we use. You guys, go and execute that. And obviously, whether it's guidance, whether it's support, whether it's allocating a budget for some training, it's important that the the finance leader obviously oversees that and pushes all that through. But essentially holding them accountable really gives them, one, they're less likely to be bored, more likely to be dynamic, more likely to think of efficient ways of doing things. And when they know they're going to be held accountable by you, it leaves little room for excuses. So those are all my points. Now, does anyone have any questions or any thoughts to add?
Thank you, Titus. I was just going to say, I think a big one is how you respond to people making mistakes, because that whole culture of empowerment, you want people to take the initiative, be proactive, but then if they do kind of fall short or they make mistakes, it's how that's addressed. Because sometimes then if you come down on them really heavy and say, well, you've done this wrong, you've done that wrong, the approach that you take in that situation is going to determine how likely they are to be proactive in the future.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And it must determine whether they, whether they feel comfortable in the future to let you know they've made a mistake. Because what can happen is, and I've experienced it, very early in my career where, very early on, where, a manager was particularly harsh whenever I made a mistake, or, and what I know what that made me feel, it meant that each time I made a mistake, I would, try to, hide it, not hide it forever, but I was trying to, quickly fix it myself and make further mistakes, or, or I would, essentially I would try anything other than say I made a
Hold your
mistake.
hands up.
Yeah, but I found, thankfully, that's not happened to me. When I moved into management, that whenever someone made a mistake, it's a case of, okay, well, let's establish how it happened so we know to avoid it in the future. More often than not, those mistakes were never repeated. Firstly, and when more mistakes were made, they spoke up about it.
Yeah.
Just on mistakes, I have found in this country, because I've worked in many countries, that there is this culture of getting rid of people very easily because you can, particularly in the first 2 years. And it is typically far more advantageous to develop someone who's been with you for a while than to lose the skills, indeed, if that includes mistakes, because hopefully that person can learn from the mistakes. So by getting a new person in, you repeat all those mistakes again. So rather spend time, if there's anyone who's got any potential, spend time developing them rather than getting rid of them, because it's, they're all the mistakes have been learning curves, and they've already learned, and a new person might have to make the same mistake again. And I once was in a situation, I had 64 people in my department, and there was one person who, when I joined the company, I thought, hell, I've got to get rid of this person. They're just completely disruptive and incompetent. That person at the end of the year became employee of the year out of 1,000 employees, simply because I took time to develop the person. And it's always better to, well, I say always, but if a person's got any potential at all, then it's definitely better to not get rid of them and rather develop them. That's my experience.
Tony, can I just say something you mentioned there? I found completely the opposite in terms of not getting rid of people that need to. I pretty much see people bending over backwards and avoiding dealing with stuff. However, what I would say is, as others have mentioned, I always refer to mistakes as we've identified a learning opportunity. So I think there is often a culture of meaningless just saying sorry all the time and repeating exactly the same mistake. And again, that goes back to my point about what goes on outside of finance. I always say to the finance team, number one, apologize and mean it. Number two, fix it. And number three, stop it happening again. So just my thoughts on what you just said. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, the person has got to be willing to change and show the ability to change. And then if they show those two things, then I'm prepared to devote a lot of time to them. If they're not willing to change, then yeah, you must get rid of them as soon as possible.
I think root cause analysis is important, because sometimes things go wrong and they just don't know why or how. So it's about tracing back to see where that's falling apart and say, okay, this is where we change things and this is how we move forward.
I think that's a good point, Resha, because often when you think of stuff around conflict, negotiation, dealing with difficult people, it's that time spent to understand the other person's view. So the mistakes, as Resha has said, could well be stuff nothing to do with the job. It's something completely different. Thanks.
Just in my last company, which was, it was a startup and pre-profit, and we were short-staffed, and it had to be short-staffed because of the financial constraints. But we got to a situation where we needed someone else. But one of our biggest failing in the department was the finance manager in particular never had chance to get to all his emails. And the department was considered to be very unresponsive, not because the guy wasn't working. He was often working 16-hour days, often worked right through the night, but he never got the chance to respond to all the emails. So at one stage, he needed an assistant. So I said, yes, you can get this assistant, but this guy's number one priority before he does anything else is to respond to emails or make sure emails are followed up. So all emails into finance went to a generic email address, and he monitored that, and he had to make sure that every single email was responded to promptly, even if he said, listen, Joe is busy with this and he'll get back to you with a week, but there had to be a response all the time. And that changed the perspective of the finance department completely, just by being responsive. And the guys knew that things just weren't going into a black hole, and there was always this constant feedback.
We are living in a keyboard warrior era, and emails are so easy, and this bottleneck of not getting through emails is a real problem.
Mammoth. And Fred, ironically, when people follow them up, all they're doing is creating more emails, and then you can't get to them. It was a never-ending battle. It was an impossible task to do it, and that's why I just got this person to have that as a number one priority.
And segregation might not work if you're still too small, but there came a point where that generic accounts email had to be split to AR/AP. Yeah. So that bottleneck is then being reduced automatically, and there's two people in charge of now managing that.
Very true. Finance has to understand that there's nothing that finance does that is for its own end. Everything is for the benefit of the company. And the culture that I have always tried to cultivate in my departments is, we are a service department. We exist for the other departments in the company and not to our own end. And a lot of other departments often see finance as this obstruction or this department that's making mistakes or whatever, but they're not seeing them as part of the team. So it's very, very important to create this culture that we exist as a service department, service for the rest of the company.
Tony, I think there's a lot of fear, actually, and a lack of understanding. My experience, and I've absolutely had exactly what you described, well, we don't talk to finance because they always say no. And it's usually because they've been presented with a problem that's not been thought through, that is illogical, doesn't work, and it's just dumped and said, right, there you go, you sort it out. I think some of your other points there around replying to email is managing expectation, because I do not think it's acceptable to expect an immediate response. And that's exactly the way the world's going. When we've got mobile phones and emails, people on call 24/7, not being in the office, all strikes me as the world going in totally the wrong direction. And people then say, oh, what a surprise, mental health problems, physical health problems. So all of this stuff is, I mean, this is a much wider subject. We could kind of go on forever, but I think what you've touched on there, Tony, is much wider stuff. Absolutely right. I mean, every organisation I've gone to, finance has usually been in a mess, and I've made some changes, and often it's that critical thinking and the challenging and supporting your team. Because I think when you gave the example of your finance manager, he actually needed support and someone to stand up for him and say, look, this is unrealistic. I think you also mentioned we couldn't afford it. Well, there's consequences of not having a fully trained resource finance team, and therefore there needs to be a realignment of expectation. Thanks.
That's very true. And often with those email responses, you can't just respond. You've got to reconcile something, research something, and it could be a day or two's work to do that. You've got to fit it in. And people outside finance don't realize that it's not a matter of just going into the system and giving an answer. It's actually a lot of work to get that answer.
Yeah, I mean,
manage expectations is exactly the point you make.
I think the other important thing is almost I've in the end did this, but you almost need a finance presentation to the rest of the business. This is what finance do. This is why they do it. So in a lot of cases, we had this whole process of program decisions. I cannot do this until this is done. If you don't give me this, you won't get that. And that actually was, it's a much smaller team, but it gave people a sense of why finance do what they do, not because they're being awkward, always saying no. I started that presentation with a question, does finance matter? And then that took me into the situation of, okay, who looks after your finances? Because again, your point about doing stuff for other people, finance are managing someone else's money. And I think that understanding at an early stage maybe will improve these kind of conversations. Thanks.
I gave a presentation once on exactly that, what does finance do to the rest of the company? And the analogy I drew was with an aircraft carrier. When the aircraft carrier goes into port, all the sailors are in their nice white uniforms standing on the deck. And that's typically the sales staff who get all the credit for everything that's good in the company. But meanwhile, the finance team is in the engine room with, oil in their hands and dirty clothes and stuff. And you get none of the glory because they're not on the deck. But that aircraft would go nowhere if someone wasn't in the engine room making sure that it goes. And that's the analogy that I've always had of the finance department.
I'm sure sales had something to say about that. Hey, if we don't sell, you have nothing to get your hands dirty with.
That's always the retort. But if finance don't manage what they sell, then what they sell will be pointless.
But yeah, correct. Because you can make the sale, but unless you invoice the people and collect the money,
no money's coming in.
It's not a sale. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'm just conscious of time. I think that's been a really interesting discussion, and really appreciate you taking the time out to prepare that, Titus, and it's kind of sparked some wider chat, which is great, but all really relevant. So Titus, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time that's gone into the presentation and also delivering. Really interesting. And thank you everyone for joining and everyone's input, and have a great afternoon.